Recording is in progress. So just to share again, my name is Nadia Hutchinson, Government Affairs Manager at We Act for Environmental Justice. We are here for our webinar as part of our Justice Forward campaign and series, Advancing Clean Energy for All with Dr. Henry McKoy. So what is the Justice Forward initiative? The Justice Forward initiative is an initiative created by President Biden in Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. For this executive order, it really sets aside that 40% of the benefits of climate investments, energy, and so much more must go to disadvantaged communities. So I'm going to play a short video that will share a little bit more about the Justice Forward initiative.
Why do we need Justice 40? Every generation wants to be happy, healthy, and safe. Unfortunately, people living in communities of color and low-income neighborhoods have been denied this basic human right. A history of harmful policy decisions have made pollution, economic instability, and climate change the norm for marginalized communities across America. The Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative sets a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. To learn more about this once-in-a-generation opportunity, visit justice40rward.org. That's Justice40rward.org.
Okay, well, that short video kind of explains an overview of the initiative, but also kind of segues into the Justice Forward campaign at large. So We Act for Environmental Justice, as part of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum, created this campaign to really help educate and bring awareness around the Justice 40 initiative. So we're really excited to have the new Office of State and Community Energy Programs from the Department of Energy here with us today. This new office was created partly because of the Justice 40 initiative, but also all of the new investments created through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. This office hopefully will help to bring clean energy to our communities. And so we wanted to make sure that environmental justice organizations and partner organizations had an opportunity to learn more about the opportunities ahead with this office. So I'm really excited to introduce Mr. Christopher Castro. He is the Deputy Director of SCEP. Do you want to take it away from here? You are on mute.
Thank you for this introduction. And actually, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Henry McKoy, who's our director here in this new Office of State and Community Energy Programs, to give us a little bit of an introduction. And then I'll take it back and actually run through a little slide deck overview of this new office, and then we can enter into some Q&A. So with that, Henry, turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, I guess, depends on where you are. I'm so happy to be here in this moment in time to have this conversation with you. I want to, first of all, thank We Act, and, I've been on the road a little bit with We Act over the last several months, and that's been fun. We spent some time in Austin and talked to the great community there, and more recently in South Bronx. So I want to thank We Act for the great work that's doing on this Justice Forward initiative, and it's such an important campaign for us to be a part of. Also want to thank Nadia, who's been fantastic in these last several months in communicating what's going on and the importance of the work, and so it's just been a great opportunity to get to work closely with We Act from that standpoint. So I just want to give kind of a quick intro. I'm gonna turn over to Chris, who, as mentioned, is our very able-bodied chief of staff who's doing so much great work to help us stand this up. So essentially, I just want to start out with saying that the Office of State Community Programs is is a brand new organization within the Department of Energy that was created out of the $1 trillion infrastructure bill that got passed in November of 2021, and then bolstered with the Inflation Reduction Act. Chris talked a bit about some of the resources we have and you know how they are important to the community. But and I get a chance to come back and have a little fireside chat in a bit. But I just wanted to set the tone and the context and let you know that we are serious about this work. It's incredibly important that that you know this time around that the benefits that come through a program like this and through programs like this accrue out to the community. So without further ado, I want to turn over to Chris. Chris comes to us from many you know, successful years leading efforts around sustainability in Orlando, and being a national thought leader, and you know, doing everything from entrepreneurship to creating nonprofit organizations, and just being a leader in this space. And so we're so happy to have him as part of the team. He serves as chief of staff, which means that he oversees pretty much all of the day-to-day operations in partnership with me. And so with that, I turn over to Chris to do the presentation.
Thank you, Henry. It's been a pleasure to be a partner in change with you in this journey. And to the We Act team, thank you all again for this opportunity. We, you know, I had an opportunity to go to the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum last fall here up in Washington, D.C., and kind of really engage with some of the organizations. Many of you might be even on the line. And it was really insightful for me to hear you all's kind of take as to the magic moment that we're in and the importance of getting it right. So today's presentation will kind of run through, you know, what that magic moment is, the imperative around energy and climate justice to do this work, the introduction to SCEP a little bit more and some of the programs that we are managing here. And then we'll talk about the Office of Community Engagement, which is another effort that we're helping lead out on. And then lastly, some prizes and other opportunities for you all as community-based organizations and nonprofits doing the good work on the ground to get access to support that work. So I think it's important to know, you know, centering the Biden-Harris administration priorities, that there really is no greater challenge facing our nation and the planet than the climate crisis. And I think the executive order that Nadia mentioned right out the gate and on day one, not only said that climate crisis was what we were going to address, but do so in an equitable way. And this is really an opportunity for us to think about how do we boost our manufacturing base and bring back supply chains in manufacturing here to the United States? How do we use this opportunity to create high wage, good paying jobs all across the country? And we know that there's an estimate of over 9 million jobs just coming from the bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. And at the same time, addressing this historic environmental inequities that are being too often faced by our low income communities, our elderly communities, our communities of color. And so DOE is doing our part to align with these administration clean energy and climate goals by essentially having these 3 North Stars that Secretary Granholm has set up for our team. You can see here that our goals are trying to reduce to 52% by the year 2030 of our emissions compared to 2005 levels. We need to get to 100% clean electricity grid across America by 2035. And lastly, move towards a net zero economy-wide emissions by 2050. And so these are all in alignment with the science-based targets. And we know for a long time that we have needed some significant investment at the federal level in order to really move it. Local governments were doing our part, certainly over the last decade, to advance it, but we knew that there was a need for the federal government to come and step in. And over the course of the last year or so, Congress has delivered. They've delivered close to over $500 billion, $500 billion in climate and clean energy resources. And Secretary Granholm often talks about basically the magic moment as these 3 really important laws that were passed. Talks about the bipartisan infrastructure law as like the backbone for this equitable climate and clean energy economy. The bipartisan infrastructure law, will invest in clean tech. It'll invest in infrastructure and supply chains. It's going to invest in our workers. It is really core to this solution. Secondly is the CHIPS and Science Act. She calls it the brain of the climate and clean energy movement. And it's really driving equitable clean energy innovation, investing in our national labs, in our universities. And a big deal is semiconductor manufacturing. We know that a number of these technologies that we're dependent on to drive clean energy are needing semiconductors, and so that's a big push, right, for the chips. And then lastly, the Inflation Reduction Act. This is the lungs of the climate and clean energy movement that we're about to embark on, and it's really aimed at lowering household energy bills, at pulling clean technologies into the market at scale, and advancing environmental justice. As you know, as you might know, there are adders for low income, as an example, to get tax credits and other tax benefits, which we'll quickly get into. So we're at this magic moment where, Congress has delivered on these three bills, and Henry alluded to the fact that fundamentally changed essentially the mission of the Department of Energy in a certain way. DOE has been a federal agency for the last 45 years, and it's focused on research and development and lab scale demonstrations, right? We have these 17 national labs, and for a long time, Department of Energy was doing the work to commercialize the technologies that are available now today, right? Things like rooftop solar panels and heat pumps and LED lighting and electric vehicles and chargers and the solutions, right, that we need to address this climate crisis. All that said, as the money came in and Secretary Granholm realized we needed to reorganize the Department of
Chris, I think you went on mute. I think you're still on mute, Chris. I still can't hear you.
So sorry about that. Hopefully you can hear me now. That was a technical difficulty on my end. Okay, great. So I'm going to move us along. All that said is we've reorganized the Department of Energy, and part of that reorganization is the creation of this new office, the Office of State and Community Energy Programs. And Henry and I have the honor of being here to help lift this new office up and ultimately deliver on the idea that we can create an office that drives place-based clean energy solutions and really acts as this bridge that connects the federal government to all 50 states, 5 territories, over 1,800 cities, 700 plus Indian tribes, and even down into our school districts and nonprofits and down to our households. I mean, the funding that SCEP is managing, and you'll see, is wide-ranging and is intended to help drive the capacity and the capabilities to advance these clean energy projects and center the needs of low-income and historically disadvantaged communities. So, SCEP manages and oversees about $16 billion worth of the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act funding. And you can see there that our core strategies and priorities are prioritizing Justice 40 and what we do, everything from encouraging community benefit agreements and requiring them for certain competitive grants to making sure that this isn't just about deploying technology, but we're thinking about this from a local economic development opportunity and ways that we can revitalize economies and boost new jobs in the clean energy space. We know that the transition to this 100% clean energy future is the greatest economic and job creation opportunity that we have in front of us in the 21st century. And SCEP is well positioned and centered to help deliver on that from the federal government. Now, we know that energy and environmental justice needs to be at the center. And I thought it would be important for me to share some of the core data that we've been looking at that really elevates the need to make this the core, ultimately the essence of what we're trying to do. This is one example where we're looking at from an environmental injustice standpoint that communities of color are more disproportionately impacted by air pollution, and primarily air pollution that they don't create, right? And we know that things like PM 2.5, particulate matter specifically, are major impacts for public health, right? Respiratory, COPD, a number of other issues that are associated. And so, this is really critical when we're thinking about air quality within our cities. We also know that our minority and vulnerable and low-income communities are also more impacted by climate change. On the front end, they're usually higher in energy burden, right? During the storms, they're usually most hit, and then they're more challenged with recovery. All across the board, we know that the need to center our minority and our low-income and our historically disadvantaged communities is key. We know that clean energy access is also a real challenge. Accessing not only the technology, but the capital that's needed to make these projects work. And too often, our communities of color have not been given that access. And lastly, we know that energy burden is, especially in this inflationary period, in this time of high cost, that energy burden is really impacting our Black, our Hispanic, our Native American, our renter communities, our adult and elderly communities. And so we know that, a portion, obviously all of us have to have a portion of our income that goes towards utilities, but we know that these underrepresented communities are being impacted sometimes 2 and 3 times as much compared to their affluent counterparts. So, this really helps center the imperative around energy and climate justice in the work that we're doing. SCEP at a high level is 28 different programs, and I'm certainly not going to go into each one of the grant programs, but this gives you an expansive look at each individual bullet that you see on this org chart is a different funding opportunity. It's a different grant program or technical assistance program that we're allocating, and they are far-reaching. Like I said, they go to every county government for the weatherization program, goes to every state, 5 territories in DC for the state energy program, and then literally thousands of communities with the community energy programs. And so I thought I'd give you a quick snapshot of some of these initiatives. We have 2 kind of anchor grant programs that we've inherited that were historically here at DOE. One of them is called the Weatherization Assistance Program, and this is DOE's, the nation's oldest whole home energy efficiency program targeting low-income households. The goal is to reduce energy costs in low-income households, and what we've seen is over $370 per year in savings from the homes that actually participate in this effort. It's a no cost weatherization service for the homes that meet a certain income. And the beautiful thing about this is it actually supports over 8,500 jobs across the country in improving, again, the quality of our indoor environment, as well as the energy use within our homes. So weatherization is really an important and anchor program. State energy program is another one of those anchors. It's also been going on for about 40 years, and it goes to all of the states and the territories in DC, and again, focused on how do we use that money to increase energy affordability and drive efficiency. Sometimes the states will package up this grant and reauthorize or re-grant those dollars to local communities so that they can start to address things like, elderly or low income HVAC upgrades or water heater upgrades or whatever it might be. The good news about this is for every dollar we've invested as the federal government, the states have seen over $4.50 in savings from their programs. And so we know it is another fantastic way that DOE can really touch all 50 states and these territories and help with advancing clean energy. I think the big grant that people are now talking about that we recently enabled is called the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, or EECBG. This funding is going to go to over 2,700 communities, basically through a formula, meaning that Congress set out how this money will go out, and it will just go based on population. If your city is of a certain size, you're going to get a certain amount of money. And as you can see here, that money is going to serve over 250 million Americans. It's going to go far-reaching. It is the furthest reaching grant program at the Department of Energy by a long shot. So it's an opportunity. Often Henry and I talk about this is an opportunity. These are the bridges that are going to go into each one of our communities, and we need to make sure that they're not just kind of one-off bridges, that we're building them to be resilient and that they're long-lasting relationships that we can build with these communities, so that as we go through this journey, which is going to take us probably a couple decades plus, that we have this meaningful, trusted relationship between local, state, and federal government to make this all work. The good news about EECBG is it's pretty broad, and local governments can use it on a wide range of things, from EVs to programs for rebates to energy efficiency improvements in public buildings. A couple of other cool grant programs you should be aware of. There's one dedicated for nonprofit 501c3s all across the country. So there's a specific grant program that now is trying to get energy efficiency materials, things like high efficiency lighting and HVAC and roofing systems and the like. And I think it's important to note that the eligible applicants for this grant have to be a 501c3 and they have to own that facility. But think of childcare facilities, homeless shelters, food banks. I mean, there are so many different types of nonprofit facilities across our communities that now have a dedicated grant program to drive clean energy. The other exciting one is around schools. For the first time ever, DOE now has this Renew America Schools grant. It's $500 million that's going to go to the neediest schools as it relates to the highest energy burden and those with students, the highest percentage of students on free and reduced lunch, as an example. We are seeing that this grant program is eligible for improvements and repairs and renovations to all types of things that reduce energy costs or lead to improved health for teachers and students within these schools. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities. We're excited. We actually got over 1,000 concept papers submitted, just this past month of interest in the Renew America Schools grant. So we know it's a big one. Now, Henry and I often talk about the fact that the Inflation Reduction Act, when it passed, it also fundamentally changed SCEP, because at one point we were just talking about the bipartisan infrastructure law and we had $6 billion and all of these grant programs, and all of a sudden IRA comes and it lands an additional $10 billion within SCEP's management. There are 4 provisions that you can see right here that fall in that $10 billion. The 2 on the left are the rebates that a lot of people are talking about. It's $8.8 billion worth of rebates, and I'll quickly talk about those. And then on the right, you have $200 million for training contractors and workers on how to install these next generation clean energy technologies, and also $1 billion to help states and local governments with updating their building codes to the latest net zero code or the latest IECC code. So the good news is that there are going to be a lot of resources now, and IRA's funding really are those that are going to get down to the households. And I'm excited. I've highlighted here in yellow some of the programs, and you can see how Congress set this up so that it is truly trying to get the benefits to flow to the lowest income households across the country. If you're between 80% area median income for your community or less, you can actually get substantial rebates, cash rebates, to do these types of clean energy upgrades. You can see there that one of them you can get up to 100% of the cost, up to $14,000. And this can help upgrade your electrical system, your wiring in your home. It can actually upgrade your HVAC, your air conditioning, to a heat pump, so that we move from a gas appliance into an electric appliance. And so there's actually going to be a lot more guidance coming out from our office about these rebates, and want to encourage you all to stand by. It is important to note that the DOE is going to be releasing these funds to the states, and the state governments are going to be managing how the rebates are administered in each one of their states. And of course, we're trying to create guidance so that there's a ubiquitous program, and to the extent that we can, and that it's not confusing for everybody out there wanting to take advantage of these programs. And if you're interested in what technologies apply for these rebates, you can see some of them here. It's not just things like your air conditioning systems, but it's also home air sealing, duct sealing, and weatherization improvements, and even, like I said, electrical panel and wiring upgrades, which I know a lot of homes are in need of, right? Moving from really outdated wiring and making sure that they can be equipped to install these technologies, whether it's solar, whether it's a future EV charging station. We need to make sure that our homes are equipped to install those things. I want to just quickly mention that there's some tools you should be aware of that can help in analyzing your community as it relates to clean energy. One tool is called SLOPE, and it basically focuses on providing state and local planning data for energy. So it can help you understand kind of future scenarios of how the emissions or your energy will evolve based on the goals that you've set out. Let it be 100% by 2040. Well, how do we work backwards and actually understand our interim milestones to get there? So there's some really good, there's a tool on our website for that, as well as LEAD tool, which is that low-income energy affordability data tool, which does a good job at visualizing the energy burden and other housing characteristics across the United States. And so looking in a community, you can actually pull up the LEAD tool and identify what census tracts within our community have the highest energy burdens and start to do some analysis so that you can pinpoint maybe outreach or different programs that you're trying to enable with your members. Knowing that we're coming up on the halfway mark here, I just want to close off by sharing some thoughts about our community engagement office. And in addition to SCEP, Henry and I are also being asked by the secretary to think about how do we create DOE's Office of Community Engagement and really be this coordination and collaboration entity that helps us be almost the connective tissues amongst all of the programs at DOE that can help place-based clean energy transition. There's a lot of money that we don't manage in SCEP, but that can still be benefiting our communities. And so the Community Engagement Office is intended to really pull that together. I wanted to mention the impressive amount of engagement we've done thus far. Just in the last 6 months, Henry primarily has done these trips in over 15 different states. He's done a couple different WEACT tours in Austin and in New York. Of course, we were in DC together for the Environmental Leadership Forum. And it just goes to show that we're really trying to do a road show and understand urban, rural, red, blue states, no matter what. We're trying to go to every state over the course of the tenure that we're here and really understand the challenges on the ground and try to bring those lessons back to the work that we're doing. And it's a part of our strategy to get out there. We manage a really cool program called Communities Leap that now has 24 communities already identified, but we're working on helping them develop a clean energy transition plan, and each one of them are really unique. And so the idea is that we can create models that could be emulated or replicated by other communities, similar communities as well. And so we're excited about Communities Leap and also these interagency collaborations where we're working with EPA and HUD and HHS and DOT and others to really do a whole of government approach when we're thinking about these energy transition communities, right? And so we're targeting all types of EJ communities, but also these coal and mining communities, rural and remote, as well as island communities. These different vulnerable types of communities that we're trying to provide, meaningful solutions for. In closing, I'm going to be sharing a few slides now on new types of programs that I feel community-based organizations can better get access to. A lot of the resources I just talked about are, by statute, are grants that need to flow through government agencies. They go through states, they go through territories and local governments, or even public institutions like schools. It's very difficult, and we have no direct fund that can go directly into supporting community-based organizations, but we are getting creative at how we can use our technical assistance resources to help support our local governments getting these grants by working with community-based organizations. So I wanted to point out that just recently, over the last couple of weeks, DOE made an announcement of over $170 million in funding and opportunities for public input to support equitable clean energy. So a couple of these programs, there's a fellowship program called the Low Income Community Solar and Energy Assistance Fellowship. It's really trying to get community members to learn about certain tools to help their community with investing in community solar subscriptions. And of course, the target is working with HHS and HUD to support the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or what we call LIHEAP, right? That's a utility bill assistance initiative at the federal level. So a good opportunity if you're interested in getting into the solar industry and learning more about that fellowship. There's a really neat prize out there called the EZE prize, and it's trying to figure out if we can create solutions that help electrify affordable housing and low-income housing. this is really challenging. And we know that often there's also this split incentive between the landlord that owns it and the renter in that home or apartment, and whether or not there's a reluctance to invest in these clean technologies because of that split benefit or the split incentive. Well, there's a prize now out there that's really over $2 million to try to figure out how can we create models that really start to get at electrifying our affordable housing. And I think this is my last one here, and it's called the Building Upgrade Prize, or Buildings Up. And we're a big part of this effort as well. And I want to point out the Equity-Centered Innovation Pathway. This prize is trying to fund 60 teams across the country to implement scalable solutions that can drive retrofits in our buildings and help decarbonize our building stock, right, at the end of the day. And so there's different pathways, but I will say these prizes are a new way of getting funding opportunities out to communities. It's a lower barrier of entry, it's easier to apply, and we're hopeful that, you know, groups like WEACT and your members can look to these prizes as ways to get involved in your communities, whether it's reaching out to the city and encouraging them to be part of their team, or you know going at it yourselves, right, and pulling together a coalition of organizations that want to participate in this prize. So that really hopefully gives you an expansive overview of SCEP. We're really marching ahead. We're working to establish our first year of SCEP and build these strong and lasting partnerships. WEACT being one of those organizations that we're excited to continue working with. We're continuing to empower and diversify our team. We're about half staff, but we have another 80 some odd employees that we need to hire between now and the end of the year. So we are interested, if anybody is looking to the DOE for career opportunities. I want to plug in the Clean Energy Corps. If you Google Clean Energy Corps, you'll see that DOE has a whole process to actually get people into the door that maybe traditionally have never been part of the Department of Energy or the federal government. We're also really trying to continue this roadshow and going to visit our various states as we get invited to speak at different events and different opportunities. And at the end of the day, really continuing to center that this is an opportunity to build wealth in our historically disadvantaged communities, not just to deploy clean energy, but for us to really center the need to do this the right way and to build wealth in a lasting way. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you all and to Henry, and you can dive into a little fireside chat about what was shared. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris, for that. That was so much information and so helpful to know. I didn't even realize how many opportunities were truly available in your office. I only knew of one or two. And so thank you for even sharing that. Lots of ways that we can be diving in and connecting. So I just wanted to introduce our Dr. McKoy again, but also I wanted to introduce Anastasia, who will be leading this fireside chat. So a little bit about Dr. Henry McKoy. Dr. Henry McKoy Jr. is the director of the Office of State and Community Energy Programs. Dr. McKoy is a seasoned professional in business, community, and economic development, policy, government, finance, energy, philanthropy, and the academic worlds. Prior to the Department of Energy, he served on the faculty at North Carolina Central University School of Business, where he led the entrepreneurship program with additional appointments at Duke, the University of North Carolina, and at Chapel Hill and Harvard. He's a former banking executive, entrepreneur, and former assistant secretary of the North Carolina Department of Commerce. Anastasia Gordon is the Energy and Transportation Policy Manager within the Federal Policy Office at WEACT for Environmental Justice. She leads federal advocacy, legislative, and regulatory work in the energy and transportation sectors. Anastasia joined from the Alliance for Clean Energy New York, where she served as the Clean Energy Policy Fellow tracking the implementation of New York's climate law and led advocacy to advance transportation electrification throughout the state. I am so excited to kick it over to you too as we dive into our fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Henry McKoy. I don't think we've met in person. I wasn't at the Houston and New York tour, so pleasure to meet you. Thanks for taking the time.
Great to be here with you, Anastasia. So I appreciate you, taking the time to have this conversation.
Yeah, like Nadia, I was so impressed by how many opportunities there are. And, Chris talked about this magic moment. I was curious, what are you most excited about in this magic moment, especially in relation to funding coming down from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, as well as the IRA and just Justice 40 in general? How are you prioritizing Justice 40?
Yes, a lot. I mean, we have over 28 programs, have nearly 30 programs, and so it's a lot. And actually, what actually drove this webinar conversation was in some of the meetings that we've been doing with WEACT in place-based. I felt like I was just kind of shooting people with a kind of a fire hose, right, of all this information, and I'm like, well, what if we had a conversation that really kind of fine-tune some of the programs that we have that really was relevant to the WEACT audience. And that's really how this conversation came about. To speak to that, I mean, there's so many different things. Chris said it's a magic moment. Nadia talked about in the introduction that this is a once in a generation. I mean, so all those kind of things. I say a couple of things that are really exciting. One is, the rebates were because the rebates, we have $8.8 billion worth of rebates that go out to particularly low income households. The overall home rebate is open to folks at all income levels, but if you're 80% or below, you qualify for up to 100% of rebates, and they're at point of sale, so you don't have to come out of pocket for anything. The appliances, same thing, 80% or below. You don't have to come out of pocket up to a certain amount, and then even up to 150% AMI. So I think the idea of being able to go into folks' homes and really do some incredible work is exciting to me from the Inflation Reduction Act side. Also, just to add another component, I feel like for me, one of the really exciting parts is also the workforce side. We have a tremendous amount of resources for workforce, $260 million to train individuals on these high-paying, family-sustaining, a lot of mobility jobs. And so part of what we talk about here is not only this notion of how we connect folks to these jobs, but also how do we help those individuals also become entrepreneurs and owners. And so I think for me, that ties in directly to this notion of Justice 40, is that it's not just about this one moment in time. It's about what do we leave behind the communities that really build those communities up over long term. And so for me, thinking about the job and the workforce opportunities and the rebates are really, really exciting.
That's excellent. And you spoke about two things that WEACT has been keenly involved in terms of building electrification and workforce development. And you highlighted two programs, which was one of our questions that you think communities could benefit from. But I also wondered, what do you think are some of the opportunities or challenges in embedding, environmental justice and equity in those programs? The programs are designed to help low-income communities and communities of color, but what extra can be done to ensure that your office, but also in general, the DOE is making sure that environmental justice and equity is a priority?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anastasia. I mean, and anybody who does this work knows how challenging it is to really go in and make sure the work is done right. I mean, because even the definition of equity means different things to different people, right? And so when people show up and they have their own idea of what equity means, we have to make sure that that is in line with what it really means to be equitable to a community. And so to that end, some of the things that we've done here within DOE is to really, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we embed this notion of community benefit into the application process. And so essentially when folks come to us and say, hey, we're ready to apply for funding, and that's not only, some of these competitive programs that we have where we open it up to communities or to other particular grantees, it's also for formula, right? When we go to state governments or local governments, we're really having them to tell us exactly how in your plan you're going to benefit the community, but it goes beyond that. We don't want you to just tell us kind of some abstract vision of that. We want the community at the table to help drive that conversation, actually be the lead of the conversation. And so we're embedding them into our application process on the front end,
right,
so that those questions are being asked and they're being driven. On the back end, we're capturing data, all of that, right? What are we, what are those proof points, those measurement points that prove out, this kind of Justice 40 piece. So I guess to answer your question, certainly it's a huge challenge. Anytime you get a whole lot of money that comes down at one time, and you have the political side too, which is, hey, get the money onto the street quickly, which also is the reality of that, hey, you haven't focused on these communities in all this time, and now, what is their capacity to absorb that capital? And so it's finding that balance between how do we make sure this money is getting out the way it needs to get out, being effective, efficient, impactful, but also equitable. And so we, that's what keeps Chris and I up at night, as well as our team, is figuring out how do we make sure that we have those guardrails in place, but also how do we make sure that when we embed equity into these programs, that we're doing it at the root level and the foundational level, and not just something surface that looks good at a ribbon cutting or a photo op, but something that really digs in deep and strengthens the community.
That's excellent to hear. I'm really glad to hear about that. You mentioned something about it's a whole lot of money coming out all at once, and that's how I felt when I, when the announcements came out of the rules and the funding, and just this presentation, and I wondered to myself, how is your office making community states aware of these programs, and how are you making it accessible and for communities, especially small grassroots organizations, NGOs? How can we help in that process as well?
Oh yeah, Anastasia, it's hard, right? But stuff like this is actually part of what we want to do, right? We want to make sure that we are having conversations and really trying to say, hey, look, this is what we have, and guess what? You plug in well here. As I said, when I would go out and talk, broadly speaking, people want to hear about what we're doing in SCEP and these programs. And I realized that depending on who you're talking to, certain programs have relevance versus not, right? I mean, I would say in some ways, all of the programs have relevance if you're about justice, right? Whether the money's going to the state, whether it's going to a local government, whether it's going to a school, whether it's going to a nonprofit. But at the same time, some places, community-based organizations can plug in directly in terms of going out to funding. Other places, they may be able to pressure the potential grantee to do certain things. And so to that end, it's just so incredibly important that we spend our time, having these kind of conversations and really, putting it out there, because, I feel bad sometimes when I get up and talk about all these different programs, and I know it leaves folks head spinning about that. Like I said, we have around 30 programs, and it's hard to get your teeth around what that means. But what we have to do within our organization, as Chris mentioned, we're doing a couple of things. One is that we're trying to bring down the barrier to getting access to these funding sources through things like prizes. And if you haven't kind of known about prizes, Chris said that prizes may be driven by something like, we have a general question, and I'm gonna be kind of a little bit facetious, how do you make your community better? Send us a 5-page kind of write up about what you would do and how it would work and things of that nature. And that may get you through the first round to the second round. And so now keep that in mind in comparison to what may be a 130-page notice of funding availability, that grant application that you may and historically have to fill out. So we're trying to find ways to, particularly for community members, to lower the barrier to how you get access to the funding and lower the administrative burden. So we're doing things like putting in blueprints and voucher systems and things like that just makes it kind of click and kind of click and move on. I say the other thing that we're doing is really focused on this idea of building out that vision of meet communities where they are. And that means how we go out and make sure that everybody in the community is hearing about this, how we talk over and over again to make sure that we're not missing anybody, but also helping folks understand, hey, if you have a question, we're creating a space for you to reach out, which is what Chris talked about with Office of Community Engagement and things of that nature. So yeah, it's critical that we do those things, and it's the burden is on us to really make sure that the people in the community are understanding these and finding a way to tap into them.
That's excellent. I was curious as you were speaking, is there a way to, whether it's on your website or otherwise, to, as you said, clickable, folks could just go and see the 30 programs and what they might be eligible for? Is there a dashboard of some sort that exists?
Well, so the answer is probably yes and no, meaning that there's a place that your audience can go out and decide that they want to learn more about us and go to the Department of Energy website under SCEP, SCEP, or type in the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, or you type my name, it should come up, and you can kind of click through. And
right.
on that website, I mean, we have, tremendous amount of great information that our staff puts up there that talks about the programs, talks about what's coming up and things of that nature. So on that level, there's certainly plenty of information out there about upcoming programs that we're releasing, as well as what we've already released. The reason I said yes and no is because I do think that we can make it easier, right? I think there's ways that we can make it more user-friendly, ways that we can really tap into it. And one of the challenges that we have is really trying to help folks navigate to where they need to get to, because sometimes the resources we have are in SCEP, right? But sometimes they may be broader. They may be in some of our sister agencies across the Department of Energy. Other times they may be with our sister federal agencies in the interagency working group. So could be HUD, could be DOT, could be USDA. And so what we're trying to do right now is find a way to help folks easily navigate, when they have questions, because I always say this, and I say it with all sincerity. I know when people come and they see me, they may come and start talking about energy because they say, well, hey, he's in DOE, so I need to put my energy hat on. But I recognize communities have many more issues than just energy. We try to figure out, well, where does energy interplay with some of those other issues? We know you have housing issues, we have, transportation issues, we have childcare issues, we have all these things that need from a wraparound standpoint. And we want to make sure that when folks walk into the door with us, they recognize that we see them as a whole people, whole communities, and they don't have to be so narrow that if it's only about the light bill, that's the only thing we want to hear about. We actually want to hear, how do we strengthen the community overall? And again, energy is a part of that. Right.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear there's discussion amongst all the relevant agencies about making these programs and grants, et cetera, more accessible.
Yeah, we actually have something called Thriving Communities Network, and Thriving Communities Network, and I'm hoping you'll hear about it more in the months ahead, but there's a group of us, me and Chris and others, get together at the White House with all the different agencies and talk about how do our different programs, how do we weave together resources to strengthen communities. And so yeah, absolutely something that we want to make sure that you all are aware of.
That's excellent. Thank you. One more question before I turn it over to the audience for Q&A. What does accountability look like, especially for state and local partners that you work with?
Yeah, well, look, I think accountability is huge, and it's something that I want to be held accountable. The Secretary wants to be held accountable. The President wants to be held accountable. And then as you go down, one of the things that we've certainly been navigating is that, like any other relationship, there's sometimes differences of opinions about what should be happening at one level, right? So the Fed has their own opinion about maybe what should happen at a state level or local level. They have their own opinion about what should happen. But what we want to make sure is, and what I push all the time, is that, hey, guess what? It's not just amongst us that the debate is happening between the Feds, the state, the local. It's also the community. The community needs a place at the table, a key place at the table, because this is these programs are for the community. And so the accountability standpoint from our viewpoint is making sure that we have those guardrails on these resources, things of that nature, and hold our grantees, which is often the states and the local governments. Chris put that interactive map up. Our programs reach over 250 million people, and we all 50 states, 5 territories, DC, tribal nations, things of that nature. And so we want to make sure that the accountability is there. And so, and that's probably also the reason why we talk about the role that the community plays, is that even though we put money into state governments or sometimes local governments, the community still has a voice. And we're asking you to lift that voice up, to make sure that the projects that are coming out of the states, the projects that are coming out of the local governments are the ones that you want to see, because Congress has created a kind of a slate of activities that a government can do. So a government can pick any of those 15 areas. However, we want to make sure that they're listening to people on the ground in the community when they make decisions about how to spend that money. So I think there's accountability all across the board, and I'm gonna keep going around and visiting those states, as Chris said, so I can hear from people directly, so I can know whether their states and their local governments actually are, taking seriously what's coming out of the community voice.
Yes, that's excellent, and we take up that charge.
I know you do. We act as always. Hey, look, there's nothing shy about your willingness to raise your voice.
Yes, definitely. All right. Let me see if there are any questions in the chat. Ooh, I do not see any. Nadia, can I ask for an assist? Are there any?
Well, I know I will say this. I did see a question earlier that I did answer it in the chat, but I wanted to just hear. One was this question about the rebates, right? The question was whether, we know a lot of low-income individuals rent, they may not own. So the question was, how would somebody who is renting, are they able to take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act credits, rebates? And I said, yes, they can. However, in these cases, they have to get the permission of the property owner in order to take advantage of those rebates, which we hope, and we're trying to really make the case to any property owner that, hey, this is an opportunity to upgrade your property with new appliances and electrification and systems, things of that nature. So, why not, upgrade those kind of things? And so anyway, the renters can take advantage of it if the property owner will, give permission. I also say this as well. I say this, one of the things that really does keep me up at night is making sure that as these programs roll out, and we're trying to get them out as quick as we can, ahead of the upcoming winter season, is that, fraud and abuse always follows money, right? When there's money, people tend to show up and try to swindle other people. And so understanding that these resources are really targeted for low-income citizens, including senior citizens and other folks like that. One thing that we're working very hard on is finding a way by which we can create a system that will create some level of ability for individuals to have a target point where they can plug in, so they can get actual information that they can trust. So, when that phone rings and somebody on the other end starts talking about, if you give me your bank card number, whatever, I get you that refrigerator, that stove, we're not going to be working like that ever. And so we want to make sure that folks understand that that's not going to be the way we do business. And we want to create a platform that individuals can tap into so they can know and trust, the information.
Excellent. There are two questions that came in Q&A. Noting the time, I'll say them really quickly and you can address whichever one. So there's one from Nora. Are there mechanisms for community members to report when government entities are not meeting their needs? And we have another question from Bailey from WeAct. What is being done to address energy burden when the energy grid fails? So,
Great questions. I answer both of them. So to the first question, we're actually thinking about that, right? In terms of, what are some opportunities for individuals to be able to express kind of their feelings about whenever perhaps a government or something like that is not living up to what they feel like is their responsibility to serve the community. We don't have that right now, other than, you can always, look, we get letters all the time from people. The president gets letters, and I say this, when you write the president a letter or you write anybody a letter, it does get answered. I mean, because once, depending on what the topic is, they pass it. So one way is to, feel free to reach out to our office if you have concerns about, what's going on in your state or your local community about how resources are being done. And we're going to try to find perhaps easier ways to do that. in terms of the remind me the second question again.
Oh, certainly. What is being done to address energy burden when the energy grid fails?
Yeah, great question. So we're actually looking at finding very creative ways around the whole energy burden aspect, right? So one is trying to get additional funds that will reduce the energy burden on households, particularly low income households, and part of it is this electrification, right? In terms of how do we strengthen that? We also have a grid deployment office sister agency who's really working on how do we target low income communities to update those grids and make them stronger and more resilient. We're also working on something that perhaps we can talk more about later, but these kind of virtual power plants, which kind of essentially converts homes into a part of the energy supply chain, and in the best possible situation would allow the demand response to kind of shift the load to places that need it away from places that don't, and then customers can essentially sell their excess energy to the power grid. And so we're trying to really go in I think it's a great question, because we're trying to go in at a holistic community level where we are thinking about how do we create building blocks to make the community stronger. So instead of the tail wagging the dog per se, chasing grants, we're saying how do we go in and lay down the grid, update the grid, up the household and schools and nonprofits and things of that nature. So yeah, we're working every day on that.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Dr. McKoy. Thank you for chatting with us and answering our questions. And I'll turn it back over to Nadia.
Thanks, Anastasia.
Yes, thank you so much, both Anastasia and Dr. McKoy. It has been amazing getting the opportunity to chat. I just wanted to uplift that we have our website at www.justice40rward.org if you want to learn more. And we will post this recording to our YouTube channel so people can play back, and if you weren't able to make it. Thank you so much, and I will talk to everyone soon.
Thanks, Nadia.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.